you need to give a reason for people to come in to the office, whether it's go for lunch or we're going to get a team breakfast in the diary. We're going to run a training session, because I think to some extent, your diary, having worked remotely, tends to get so stacked with back-to-back meetings that you're just not used to spending time stopping and chatting. People have almost forgotten how to do that. So I think it's the responsibility of leaders to encourage that environment.
Hey, this is Gareth Webb, and you're listening to Breakout, a show that cuts through the hiring noise. Here, you'll get an unfiltered view on what early and growth stage companies are doing so that you can take their best practices, processes, and frameworks and implement them to help you build teams more confidently. Good morning, Gordon. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Very well, Gareth. How are you?
I am good. Just for the listeners, so Gordon is VP of Revenue at Hubble. I'll let him explain who they are. This podcast is the denim edition of Breakout. It's absolute accident for anybody that's looking at video. Gordon and I obviously just, as we joked before, trying to cling on to our youth, and this is not sponsored by Wrangler. I still can't believe we're both wearing the same shirt. Gordon, tell us a bit about Hubble and yourself and your role in the business.
Sure. So Hubble is a flexible workspace platform. So essentially, we're making it easy for companies to come up with the right workplace solution for their teams. So that might be as simple as just helping them find a full-time office. We've got thousands of different listings. They can come to Hubble, find an office. There's a team of advisors here that can help them navigate it, get a really good deal, and make sure that they're looked after. But also, more recently, we've shifted after the pandemic into helping companies find more flexible type solutions. So that could be an office for 2 or 3 days a week. That could be access to co-working day passes for some of the team members, really giving people the opportunity to kind of put together a flexible working package that makes sense for them and eliminates wastage. Company's been around for about nine or so years. Started off initially as a kind of online brokerage and then shifted, as mentioned, into more of a kind of SaaS type model, working with companies on a different flex solution. I joined the business about 6 months ago as VP Revenue, as you mentioned, essentially the first external sales leader the team here had hired.
Okay. Well, prior to that, were the founders were doing it, or is it like additional brokers?
Yeah. So there were sort of sales managers, sales directors within the business, but somebody to look at the strategy in terms of there's this great new product that the team had been working on that had shown some really initial promising signs of initial product market fit, had some good customers sign up and show interest. And it's really, how do we take that new product, the flexible working platform, to the next level?
Okay. So your whole career is very much dialed into like the category of future of work. And you've obviously like LinkedIn, well, initially like recruiting, then LinkedIn Talent Solutions, Hired, where we work together. Then you had a stint at a remote employee, a remote hiring business, right? Localized. This is like I guess it's a very interesting angle. I want to get your take on, I guess, why you joined the business, which kind of reinforce why you think it's a good idea. But it's just very timely, and that's why we wanted to talk to you, because we're talking to lots of founders, VC firms, execs, talent, and people leaders who are just pretty clueless at the moment about like how to try to please people as much as possible. So you've gone from like talent solutions and hiring solutions to now this kind of like hybrid of, I would call it kind of future of work, prop tech business.
Yeah.
What was it like attracted you to them and made you realize it was a good opportunity?
Yeah, look, I think there's the kind of the stuff that you'd expect in terms of the remit being, a good fit in terms of where Hubble was at in terms of the journey, and me feeling it was that right balance of, an opportunity that I was going to be able to come in and learn from, but also that I'd be able to bring value to the team here based on some of the experiences that I've seen from different businesses. Founders are a great bunch, and the team that I met as well, everybody's hugely passionate about what we're doing, and just a really nice group of kind of ambitious people that care about the business and see a massive opportunity. But to your point, future of work and having kind of worked in HR and recruiting technologies and spending a lot of time speaking to talent acquisition and people leaders, just knowing that, and having gone through the process myself, trying to do office moves and figure out what the best strategy looked like for my teams in previous roles of, post-COVID, bringing the team together and creating an environment that doesn't cost tons of money, that people actually use and people actually enjoy, is really tough. So when I heard about the product that the team here have been building and kind of realized that actually there's a lot of work to do, but if they get that right and figure out exactly what customers are looking for and can build a solution to that, there's a huge, huge opportunity, because, every company pretty much is still to a certain extent figuring this out. I think some people are a bit further ahead than others. Some people feel they've got their strategy locked in. Some people are feeling that the strategy that they got locked in after COVID is no longer working, and they're trying to kind of come back to the table again and figure it out. So I think it's it really is, how do companies over the next 5 to 10 years think about workplace, think about collaboration with their teams, think about bringing their employees together and creating those environments whilst also not being super inefficient and shelling out a really large amount of money on, office space that potentially just isn't being used properly, which is a big pain point that we hear a lot.
Yeah. I mean, apart from AI and chat GPT, like this is currently the most talked about thing with all of our customers. Like every single hiring company, if they're sort of in that sweet spot where they're big enough to have a few offices and they can have remote hubs around those offices, they probably have a bit of an advantage. If you're a behemoth, trying to pull everybody back into office full time doesn't seem to be working or resonating or engaging staff in the right way. And then if you're like outscale size or you're a seed series A type, you're trying to form culture, and the whole definition of culture has probably changed quite a lot since before COVID, I would argue. Since you've been there 6 months, I guess you're still figuring this out, but like ideal customer profile, like who are you trying to talk to most of the time and how those conversations are going? Is there trends emerging very quickly that you've noticed, or is it like a changing dynamic?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for, Hubble or businesses like Hubble to help and support companies of all different shapes and sizes. But where we really see the biggest opportunity is that sort of seed, Series A or equivalent. And we're not just exclusively focused on kind of, venture-backed businesses, although they do tend to be a good fit for us. But companies of that 50 to maybe 250 odd employees is a kind of good sweet spot for us across various different industries. We do see tech as a big one because tech businesses tend to be kind of aggressive, a bit more open-minded when it comes to this kind of stuff, and early adopters and all those kind of good things. But also across creative, financial services, we see really good take up as well.
Yeah. So you've mentioned before, so it's like people, ops, founders, and they're the sort of 3 stakeholders that you're typically targeting and speaking with.
Yeah. It'll be kind of office managers, operations, COOs, head of ops, and in some cases founders, and in some cases kind of head of people. We tend to find the businesses that we primarily work with don't have their own sort of workplace strategy or facilities team at that stage. Yeah.
I mean, so the new thing that you launched, which is what I think I saw the ad or the post and messaged you about, it's your new kind of offering. Is it part-time office, or is that the name of it? Or
yeah, that's right. So part-time offices. So that really is kind of moved very quickly this year. Was speaking to so many customers, probably from Q4 last year to coming into the beginning of this year, who were either coming to the market for the first time since COVID and trying to come up with a solution. And that was what their team wanted, was essentially to come to the office 2 or 3 days a week. And there's just that obvious kind of friction. Well, do I really want to go and spend money on an office for 5 days a week when everyone's telling me for a fact they're only going to come in for 60% of that time? It just logically doesn't make sense. But there was also a big bunch of customers who felt like they had a strategy in place after COVID. They'd maybe got an office. They had something in place. People were really excited to come back. And I think another thing to bear in mind was the market isn't how the market is today, but perhaps people weren't as cost focused as they are in the current climate, that there was an element of, well, so what if people aren't using it? It's what people ask for. We've got the office back again. It's cool that people can come and use it when they want to. And they weren't really looking at the P&L in as much detail.
Yeah.
Those businesses now, as everybody knows, right? CFOs and finance directors are paying way more attention to what's going out the door every month. And for the majority of businesses, office space is the second biggest line item after salary costs. And if there's something that you can do to that, or you don't believe it's being spent efficiently, it kind of has to be addressed. So we're seeing a mixture of, people coming to the market for the first time, but also people who are just saying, this isn't working. We can't continue to kind of spend money on something that just isn't being used. It doesn't make sense. And the conversation we kept having was, what I'd ideally like is an office that's ours to use on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Now, that's like another conversation. Some companies, it obviously varies, are a bit more open to that. But another trend that we've seen is Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays tend to be the core days. Most people want to come together. And we really kind of wanted to understand what we could do to kind of bridge the gap, because, essentially Hubble is a marketplace. We sit between our customers who are looking for that solution and all of the kind of workspace providers. Landmark, and lots of other, all of the major and a lot of boutique companies.
Do you partner with WeWork?
Yes.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I mean, you're describing us. Like we had a really nice office in WeWork because we went remote for a little bit and some people got really disengaged. This was after COVID. Everyone wanted to be back in. Took out a really lovely lease office in a WeWork. Cost a fortune, even though it was less expensive than taking out a lease and fit out and all that stuff. And then gradually everyone wanted to do 1 day from home, 2 days from home, 3 days from home, and everybody was performing pretty well. So we were like, yeah, cool. Why are we spending this disgusting amount every month on a lovely spot? Now, they don't seem to be doing what you're talking about, which is this, sharing of an office and having X number of days where you can go into a space that's set up. I think that's a really, really good idea. It obviously takes a little bit of management, right? But that happy medium could and should exist. I think it's great that you guys are doing that. I mean, we've spent especially with smaller like seed series A startups, like trying to say to them, don't force everybody in because you're just going to like exclude a massive portion of the talent available to you where some people don't even want to go into the office at all, right? But like we've got a couple of companies where they're seed stage and they want the mind share and they want everybody in sort of 3-4 days a week. Some they want them in 4 or 5 days a week still. And it's like engineers and product folk. They're just they're not able to hire because of that. So I think anything like this is really effective. Do you see a different conversation between people, operations and founders? Like are the founders or like exec team more hardcore about wanting people in, people a bit softer about it, office managers or operational folks sort of more neutral? That's what I would imagine. But like you're talking to them every day. Like I'd kind of love to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag company to company. I think you'll see that the strategy changes a lot from business to business, and there probably are differing views along the lines of what you've said. I think there's, it kind of exec teams perhaps have a feeling that people should be in the office on a more regular basis. Although one thing that kind of conflicts with that is the demographic is kind of flipped at that point, and you'll often find a scenario where it can be their sort of, younger, more junior team members who maybe a bit earlier on in their career that actually really want access to the office space. Whereas some of the more senior and more tenured team members like the idea of working from home. And that could sometimes include the leadership team. So I think that works as long as the leadership team or the CEO are prepared to kind of practice what they're preaching and be in the office, because I don't think it works. I think it's a tough sell if you're going to mandate that this is what it is. Everybody needs to be in X number of days, but I don't. Right. That's like a hard one for people to kind of to get on board with. And I think that's sometimes where leaders struggle because it means they have to do it. And sometimes their direct, management team and leadership team who there might be a little bit more resistance from tend to push back.
Yeah. So you said Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays is when most people seem to want to go in and meet up. So I'm in a minority making everyone come in Monday morning for a meeting.
It changes. Like I went through a phase quite recently going in myself on a Monday morning, just because personally I feel it's a good way to sort of, reset my week, get on the train on a Monday morning, do the commute and spend time in the office space regardless of who's there. I think for kind of sales organizations, there's always been that sort of tradition. But yeah, it does seem that Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays are the kind of prime days.
Yeah. Is there one of the things I have definitely struggled with in the last year is like wanting to have the learning and the mind share and dare I say like culture formation. But then you see all these TikToks where people are just like cringing and eye rolling behind the scenes of hating the forcing of those things. But I think when you're like leading teams, you can see some people really engage well digitally. Some people, it's very obvious that they slightly decay in terms of engagement or maybe mental health. And then you have some time around each other and you can see the bonding and the learning improve. The bit that I sort of internally cringe at is like, is everybody else cringing at this like forced fun culture learning stuff where it's like we could just be on Zooms and Slack, right? And that's the default easy option. Do you feel that there's companies out there doing it really well and some that are trying to force it or not quite making it work based on what you see and hear?
I think the big thing that from customers I've spoken to and what I've seen is, it kind of sounds obvious when you say it, but I still think a lot of companies don't do this, is you need to give a reason for people to come in to the office. I think if you've had a period of time where you've allowed your employees to work from home, log on remotely and kind of do what they want, and then you encourage or demand that they come in for 1 or however many days a week, and they find themselves getting on a bus, getting in a car, jumping on a train, spending an hour, maybe even more in each way, commuting, coming and sitting in the office, their day is exactly as it would have been if they sat at home. They're going to get frustrated unless they really like train journeys or, spending time in their car listening to the breakfast show. You've kind of actually, if anything, you've just taken productivity away from that person a day. And that's not to say that you need to hire like face painting or like bring animals into the office to kind of really, really make it like the kind of carnival atmosphere. But we're just going to go for lunch, or we're going to get a team breakfast in the diary. We're going to run a training session. Just really make sure you make it clear that you guys should go for lunch, take an hour and a half, whatever it is, because I think to some extent people have lost, if it's not as familiar, your diary, having worked remotely, tends to get so stacked with back-to-back meetings that you're just not used to spending time stopping and chatting and socializing, that kind of water cooler type discussions that people, always historically referred to. People have almost forgotten how to do that. So I think it's the kind of responsibility of leaders to encourage that environment. And as I say, it doesn't have to be like a really full-on schedule of tons and tons of stuff. There has to be a reason. People need to be able to kind of on that journey home, say it was worth me coming in. I learned something, or I spent time with my colleagues that I wouldn't have been able to do at home. Otherwise, I just think it's a really tough sell, and people will just resent the fact that you're just doing it for the sake of it.
Yeah. I mean, not to bang on about our age, but like things have materially changed in the last 5, 10, 15 years from it being like forcing a certain type of culture in office, then the culture out of office. Like the classic one in the UK, right, is, and to an extent here as well in Austin, is like Thursday evening drinks was always a thing, and sometimes also Friday evening. And to me, that seems to have just gone. Like, it's like, and obviously it isn't ideal because you've forced people. Like, I always used to feel like I had to sort of go partake in that sort of stuff. And on top of a very hard working week and the commute, and then adding that on top, like you create pretty bad, I wouldn't say fully toxic, but I'd say the opportunity for burnout exists way more. Whereas now, like, people can be far more like safeguarding of their time and their well-being. So it feels like that kind of thing has gone. But then again, like when we do sort of meetups or activities, as we try to do it more in working time. So it's not like, oh, you have to commit your whole evening to work. So it's like an early, mid-afternoon type thing. But I underestimate how much people do value doing that, like meeting up, especially if it's less often. So we did like, it's pretty cliche, but like a top golf session a couple of weeks ago with the team. And I had like notes the next day of people saying, hey, that was really good. Thank you for organizing it. And like, you could visibly see people like elevated together. Like, it's very nice to see that amongst team activity, because like, you're trying to build good performance, but it should be done in an enjoyable way also. So I think that's where I think like it's changed, is just, what an office means to people and what meeting means to people, and like how that fits in around work and stuff. So I think you're slightly off topic with workspace, but I think it sort of dovetails into culture a bit and making people feel like they enjoy the place that they work. Do you still feel like people want to go into a place that's like a branded up environment that's theirs? Like, obviously when we were at Hired, we had in Waterloo, there was that cool little office, and then we had the one in Shoreditch. And I think everyone liked the fact that it was the Hired space, and it was a kitchen lounge area, the meeting rooms. It was pretty beautifully done out. Thank you, Amy. Like, do you still think there's a bit of that, especially in younger folks that want to go into a nice environment that's branded and that they feel part of that business, like more physically?
It's an interesting one, because I think if you've got the budget and a big enough team, I think that's still a good thing to do if you can. And I think this is where we're going to start seeing a shift in terms of client behavior. And I guess it's one of the conversations that we're having with customers literally right now. You mentioned the part-time office thing, but this is all a compromise. What we're starting to be able to do is to say to companies, you can have what you were looking for, which is an office for a few days a week. And it's going to save you quite a bit of money because you're not paying for the other 2 days. But there's a compromise in that, which is, given you only have it 2 or 3 days a week, you can't kit it out. You can't put your logo all over the walls because it's technically not 100% your office. Mm-hmm. And that's where the kind of the compromise is. And I think that's just going to have to be a bit of a shift in mindset and behavior that we'll start to see, not just this, but that kind of thing and how people think about workplace. Because my feeling is we're going to get to the point where it's less about that stuff. I think that's the kind of icing on the cake if you can have it. But actually it's more about having a nice, professional, set up, functioning workspace for us all to be able to get together on. And then it's for that team and the leaders of that team to kind of figure out what to do, like you were talking about in terms of the balance of social and team activities to make it a fun environment to work in, to figure that out. And it will be less so about the specific aesthetics, particularly with more and more the kind of flexible office providers. The actual shared aesthetics are getting better and better. They're spending much more money on the communal areas of those office spaces. So that when you see a lot of people now on LinkedIn, posting videos, posting selfies, that kind of stuff, a lot of them are in shared workspaces that look very cool. They've got nice kind of backgrounds. And a lot of that's the kind of the communal areas. So I think we'll kind of continue to see that, which is the overall building you're in is really cool and people like hanging out in it. The units might be, still very nice, but they're not yours, but they're kind of fully branded.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the WeWork model. The one we use in Austin is a beautiful building. The communal areas are really cool. There's a good atmosphere. When you're part of a small business and it feels small, it's nice to be bumping into other folks. And there's even like big companies in our building, right? Like Zapier, and I think even like Goldman Sachs and Microsoft have small little cubicles, but they're out in the shared space. So that it makes you feel like, okay, even these big companies are doing this. And I think that's a good like sanity check with the team, and people like that sort of humming atmosphere that is in those big, nice communal areas, and they do look good and it's not branded up. So yeah, I think just being somewhere that feels good, is clean and has an atmosphere and is not home basically, because working from home is great, but it can, it can get a little bit dull. What are in terms of like commercial real estate and company decision making, what are the trends that you guys are tracking and what you're seeing?
I guess, the big one that we're aware of and a lot of people in the sort of flexible office space are also aware of is the kind of traditional leases. So historically, the way the kind of commercial real estate market has tended to work is you go and find an office space, you sign a lease that could be 3, 5, maybe even 10 years long. There's very, very little flexibility in that. The landlord is unlikely to let you get out of it. You're making a really serious long-term commitment. And that's tended to be the kind of go-to for larger companies. They felt confident that they've got 5,000 employees. They need a headquarters. You take out that long-term lease. The longer it is, the better deal you get. And that's the way things have worked. I think that's where the industry is really likely to shift a lot in the next couple of years. I think 2024 and 2025, there's a really high proportion of long-term commercial leases coming to an end. And those businesses are then going to have to kind of ask themselves the question of, do we want to go and sign another 5-10 year lease and tie ourselves in with no flexibility? Or do we want to look for a more flexible solution for our team that could involve, some kind of flex space, some element of working from home, some kind of hybrid model. And that's really where a shift is going to come for the real estate market in the commercial space, is the enterprise, larger customers changing their mindset. The amount of space that they currently have is just going to filter down and the supply is going to have to grow. So I think that means probably some growth for the flex providers that we've already been speaking about, the companies that we partner with, but also for traditional landlords to start taking a different approach, which is they're going to have to look at their portfolios and actually think, how do we turn this into space that companies are actually going to want to use, and come up with commercial terms that companies are actually going to be happy to kind of sign up to, because as I say, there's just going to be less and less appetite for companies to be signing up into those long-term leases.
Yeah. I mean, we looked at one before we took out the WeWork space. We had a lease for 2 years. So we started in WeWork. We took a lease for 2 years. Hardly used it, obviously, because of COVID. We went remote for a while, and then we were like, actually, we do want a headquarters. We had one kind of mid-COVID negotiation going on with a new build, which actually was amazing. Like, it had gym, showers, decent sized unit, coffee shop on site. And the deal was so good. It was almost too good to be true. It turned out to be too good to be true, because mid-lease negotiation, they sold the building. And then there was just no alternatives. Like, everything was very 80s, 90s blocks, big suites. The landlords would not commit to like refurbing them. So like the best deal we could get was like, I think it was like a 3-year lease. We had to pay the bulk of the fit out, which would have been like $100,000. And we were just like, there's just no way in this changing, like rapidly changing environment. So we ended up at the WeWork. But I think if more landlords, as you say, like once these leases start expiring at a more rapid rate and people are like, we're not paying the old models, they're going to probably just have to take on more of a WeWork design mindset, aren't they? And kind of carve up their space a bit more and actually invest in the facilities to be more modular and I guess just adaptable.
Yeah, that's it. And ultimately they'll probably have to do more work in figuring out how to do that, setting it up, paying people to help them do it. It was a good gig, signing people in for a 5-10 year lease, and then that's it. Just kind of, it's locked in and done. It's just going to be a demand based on demand. I guess, trends wise, another thing that we're seeing with customers kind of coming to us is there's a bit of a mismatch, I would say, in terms of expectations from companies coming to the market and looking for office space at the moment, thinking they're probably going to get quite a good deal because there's a lot of companies working remote. There's a lot of companies working hybrid. Therefore, the office space providers are probably not as busy as they were pre-COVID. And that actually isn't true. There's, generally speaking, in kind of in major hubs, the office space providers are busy. They are at fairly high occupancy levels across the board. But they are also, the companies that we partner with to provide space, energy costs, inflation, their costs have gone through the roof in the last 12 months, which means they're having to increase prices, which obviously they don't want to be doing, but they literally have no choice to run a sustainable business to bump the costs up. So we're having to kind of do a lot of, managing of expectations with the customers who we're speaking to and trying to help them find a space in that, the budget that you've come to us to speaking about just isn't realistic. And this is why, just to sort of set that expectation, because people have just got an expectation that's going to be super cheap when actually it's going to be potentially more than it would have been a couple of years ago because of the costs that are in play.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't really got to grips with the whole energy cost and pricing crisis because I'm currently living in Texas where it's staggeringly cheap still. But a friend of mine, she's a CMO in the UK for a chain of gyms. And she's like, that every gym is like shutting down the swimming pools because they cannot afford to heat the swimming pools. And customers don't want to use freezing cold swimming pools. So they're just filling them and like changing the space. So, I mean, it's crazy that the price of energy can have such an impact on businesses.
Yeah.
And I've got obviously like in colder climates, like that's a big deal. I think like we try to educate companies based on what other companies do that they're doing well and ones that are like just not doing particularly well. I mean, like hiring and retaining people, but for you, it's different because you're now like talking more about how they run their business and how they scale their business. What advice do you have to business leaders about, choosing or going into like the whole decision-making process of how and where they work? Like, what are the things that you think people should be talking about, discussing, deciding on? Like, how would you sort of summarize that advice from all the conversations you've been having in the last 6 months?
Yeah, I think the things that I would say are be transparent about the process, be just as open as you can about this is the process that we're working through. This is the end goal that we're trying to get to. Call it out early on that people need to recognize that everyone in the business, all of your colleagues are going to have slightly different views and that it's impossible to create a solution that's going to keep everybody happy. I think, and everyone needs to get comfortable with that. The leadership team needs to get comfortable with that. The rest of the employees need to get comfortable with that. And it just takes, I think a mature and transparent approach to realize that, look, there's going to be a solution here that, potentially some people are absolutely going to love and other people might not be as big a fan on.
Do you think anyone wants to be in the office full time? Like, do you think there's any places like that or any companies like that?
I think one thing that we've seen is if you can find a setup that allows you to give people access to the office 5 days a week because they've said that they do and they genuinely follow through with it. There's like a whole other thing there, which is, you may have seen it as well, but a massive trend that we see is our customers survey their team and there's generally speaking a really big overestimation of usage. Because if you don't currently have a solution, people always like to say when they're sitting from their home office, on like a nice sunny day and they think it'd be good to be kind of out and about and in the office. Yeah, I'll be in 3 days a week. But is that person routinely coming in 3 days a week in 6 months' time? We tend to see that it isn't the case. And actually, they're probably only coming in 1 or 2 days. So I think it's kind of just being aware that there is that overestimation there.
Yeah,
but we do have a lot of customers who want access, and that could be through, you give them access to just co-working passes that they can use themselves. So that could be a fairly cost effective way of doing it. They could just go to their own space. It's a benefit essentially that they have. They can go book a co-working space. They have that office environment, or if it makes sense, have an office environment that's accessible 5 days a week, but you accept the fact that you're not asking people to come in. It's just there if people need it, based on their feedback. And then you're providing what people have asked for. And if there are some people in the team who just working from home doesn't work for them for whatever the reason might be, and they feel really strongly they want access 5 days a week, we do still see people providing that.
Yeah. So basically,
what I would say is I very, very rare to see companies enforcing 5 days a week, right? That's just, I feel like it's really rare. You see some big investment banks in the headlines, obviously talking about that. And I think
was it Lloyd's last week? They were like, we want everyone back in.
That's right. Lloyd's, I think JP Morgan a week or two before that, asking their managing directors all to be back in the office 5 days a week to set that example from the top down. It kind of comes back to that thing again of, if the leadership aren't doing it, you can't expect everything else. And that's fair enough, right? They've got their model, they've got their reason. And for one thing,
they get paid £1 million a year.
Yeah, that helps, right?
Well, they have like regulatory sensitive, like I think Google is like, you can work in the office or you can work from home. You cannot work for anywhere because they don't want any like IP risk. Banking, you have obviously like insider trading and customer sensitivities. So I sort of do understand why they're like, no, we need it in here on our network, not with someone looking over your shoulder who works for Goldman, seeing some transaction details. So that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's really rare for us to speak to customers who are getting an office with the intention that everyone is going to come in 5 days a week.
Yeah. So what you're saying in terms of like advice to companies is just like be clear and be very explicit upfront about what your working pattern and style is going to be.
Yeah, and then articulate it. And then the other biggest thing, and this is easier said than done, is trust. I think once you've put a strategy in place, you have to trust it, and you have to trust your team to work within the parameters that you've set, and accept the fact that means, depending on the setup that you put in, some people might not come in ever if you've allowed them the remit and flexibility to do it. Because where I see it going a bit wrong is companies set a strategy and say, you can come in or you cannot come in, or we'd quite like you to come in on a Tuesday, but you don't have to. I mean, it's just like, it's not fair to do that to people. No. I think it's, you kind of need to just say it is or it isn't.
It's a bit passive aggressive almost, isn't it?
That's it. And then you end up in that whole scenario of favoritism, and are those people more likely to get promoted because they spent more time in the office versus the people that you actually said didn't have to come in. And I speak to sometimes hear, senior leaders saying, it frustrates me because we've allowed people to come in, but we hope they would come in a little bit more regularly. And I get frustrated when I'm in the office and people don't come in. And I just think if that's how you really feel, you need to bite the bullet and make it a thing and say, we expect you to be in. Everyone needs to be in for 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And if that doesn't work for you, that's cool. But that's what we've decided and it's what we've landed on, and make a call on it. And those are tough decisions. And it's not an easy thing to do because you will alienate some people to do that, but you can't, well, you can, but it becomes frustrating for everybody if you set a strategy and then you're kind of reneging on it because you're not really following through with it. By all means, adjust it and say, hey, listen, this isn't working. These are the reasons why it's not working. We need to have a bit of a refresh, and this is how we're thinking about it, and start again and try the new strategy. But otherwise it feels like you're kind of, saying one thing and doing another because, look, as a sales leader, there's times where I can come into the office and not all of the sales team are in, or only a few members of the sales team are in. And it would be easy for me to sit there and think, why aren't the team coming in today? Why don't people, want to be in the office? But we've set that as our strategy, and it's fine. And it doesn't mean anything that they're not. If I wanted them to be in every day, I would tell them that they needed to be in every day. Can understand sometimes when you kind of have leaders feeling frustrated that, well, where are people? But you told them they didn't need to come in. So if you don't like it, you just need to go back and change the strategy.
Yeah, I think it's like people have this fear of like a mass exodus, right? If they're like, hey, this is what we want to do, this is what it's kind of very I think the problem with LinkedIn is like everyone sees all this like solopreneur, freedom, side gigs. It's like business leaders get very paranoid about, well, I'm paying people good money, plus I'm paying good money for this space. The older fashioned folks just want to see and hear the hustle bustle of like, dare I say it, like their money at work. It's like everything's working well and there's this hive of activity and business is humming along. But actually like most companies, like it doesn't really work like that anymore, right? Like I think people kind of work well like on their own and they've got so many different tools and distractions and notifications that sometimes an office space full time anyway is just another distraction. Whereas like you can get along very focused. I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, like very focused, get lots done without distraction when you're not in an office environment. On the subject of trust, final point really, and then we can sort of like conclude, but we're very data driven. So we track a lot of stuff, which is through our own platform and through HubSpot. And everyone has, dare I say KPIs, but we have KPIs and OKRs and all that kind of stuff. Like we have lots of things that allow us to know when we're tracking well as a business, and kind of that's all that really matters, right? Like kind of whatever you want to call it, North Star metrics. Do you see, there's some companies here in the US that like deploy tracking software, right? Like monitoring and they now call it productivity. Like they call it like a tool to help productivity, but really it's like how many keystrokes, how much mouse activity, what apps are you using and what's your consumption of those apps? Like, do you ever come across any of that stuff? Because I know people that use it. I know there's a big company here in Austin, Texas that does exactly that. And we see on our platform when candidates sign up, especially engineers, we ask them like red flags, like things you don't want in a culture and environment. And one of those that comes up a lot is monitoring software. And I was like, wow, people really doing that? But they absolutely are. Do you come across it?
I don't, to be honest. I've definitely heard of it and I know that it exists. Seems to be a thing within the sort of, within tech teams specifically, within certain organizations. We're able to obviously help companies understand their data and their usage, but it tends to be more from the type of conversations that we're having is efficiency is the solution that we've put in place being used properly, people taking advantage of it. Right. What are the, office spaces that people do like using? What teams are they on? Are the trends in terms of our marketing and sales teams spend more time in the office than our
when they clock in and stuff?
Yeah. So if you're booking, if you're booking office space through the Hubble platform, all of that is tracked. So we're able to kind of bubble up reporting insights in terms of that next level of, and, productivity and those kind of concerns. Not something I've heard as much.
Yeah. No, interesting. I just wondered because I think some people are like, well, if we're going to let you work from anywhere, we can trust you, but we also just want to know what's happening and flag if somebody's not doing stuff. We've had some people over the last year or two that definitely exploit the remote working more, and some people are just completely dialed in and really productive and love it and respect it. So I do get why people sort of, especially some slightly more, dare I say, like old fashioned type businesses where they're like, no, we need everybody in and we want to see it and we want to sort of drive activity that way. But it's really interesting. I think the debate's never going to go away, is it? It's just what I now know after the last 3 years is you cannot please everybody, so you shouldn't try to. I think I haven't been clear enough early enough to your point about this is what it is going to be and this is what's expected. I've kind of done one thing, taken some feedback, changed a bit, taken someone else's feedback, changed a bit. It's like, oh, we're in more and we're in less. I've kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and been like, we're just remote now and we will meet up once a week in the WeWork to go through forecasting, kind of more of an accountability session, which you should kind of want to do if you're in a kind of outcome driven environment. And then monthly or quarterly, so more social type meetups. I think it works well for us now, but it's taken me probably too long, longer than it should have to get there. And I think that's probably what you're saying is a lot of people are just still dithering around trying to figure it out. And
that's it. But I think you need to also be realistic about how easy it was to do. It's not been a normal 2 or 3 years. So I think the experimentation and testing and figuring out what works and doesn't, and some stuff not necessarily working was always going to be the case, given everything that's kind of happened in terms of the last couple of years with COVID, energy crisis, rates increasing, very tough economic market. All of these things are they're not new, but they're all factors that kind of influence. I guess one thing that I see a bit on LinkedIn and on other platforms as well is that now the market's tightening up and it's harder. There's more kind of pressure from a revenue perspective for businesses. The power has shifted from the employee, where it was kind of 18 months ago, to the employer. And therefore that means companies are going to start dictating that everybody comes back in 5 days a week. I don't think that's going to happen. I think those conversations are going to be based more around, cost effective decisions for the business and what makes sense to help the company be successful. Potentially stuff will shift a bit, maybe from a day a week, 2 days a week, or whatever it might be. But I don't see any kind of signs of, you said before, but companies suddenly turning around and saying, okay, the market's really tough. That means everyone suddenly has to come in 5 days a week, because I don't think that will help. I don't think that's a helpful strategy.
No, I think it just makes a bad situation worse, doesn't it? It breeds real negativity. Yeah. And so for bringing this back to people and hiring a little bit, like, you're in the VP level position. What are, in terms of building teams and hiring, what are things that you find the most challenging or more difficult than they need to be?
I still think the initial sourcing phase is challenging. Yes, is that the sourcing and attraction. Like, there's some good platforms that exist out there, and better models of doing stuff. But I still think it's I'm still surprised that it's 2023 and a lot of companies are still posting jobs on kind of traditional job boards, like they were doing sort of 25 years ago.
That's mad, isn't it? And literally like 19, when were the first job boards? 98, 99, probably.
Yeah, exactly. And I saw this week that LinkedIn's celebrating its 20th birthday, and that's cool. And look, I think there's a lot of good stuff to be said about LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But even LinkedIn's 20 years old, right? Yeah. And so that's not like a massively innovative way to, brand your business or hire. Like, it's still got value for sure, but it's not
kind of a job board though, right? Like, and maybe a candidate database on the back end. So you find it hard to get you still find it difficult to get the right kinds of people in front of you, or you get you in front of them quick enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that gap between, somebody moves on for whatever reason, or you've got growth plans and you have headcount approved? It's that initial gap of wanting to move quickly, because generally, obviously in a startup environment, there's a reason you need to move quickly. There's quotas that need to be hit. There's an element of pressure on. Once people are in pipeline, things, assuming they're the right kind of people, I feel that companies have got a lot better at having a good process in terms of making it the right match, in terms of thinking about the candidate experience. People talk a lot about that in terms of, how you position your value proposition. You make it a two-way process. You're kind of thoughtful and considerate about the process that you're putting candidates through. You move quickly, all that good stuff. I think, companies have got a lot better at that, but it's just that, for me, it's that initial bit of, I really, really need to hire somebody and want to start interviewing immediately. And there's a gap there.
Yep. I do agree.
Which is not a new thing, right? That's like not a new challenge, but like I say, there's solutions out there that help bridge that for sure in certain industries, maybe more so than others.
Yeah. I mean, everywhere I look, people are focusing on the wrong thing. Like now everyone's like, oh, ChatGPT can write job specs for you. It's like, who cares? Like, no one reads them anyway. No one reads job specs. They just want to know the company, the title, the kind of deliverables. Like, smart people know what the job is. It's just like the nuances they'll figure out in interview, but they want to know title, company, stage, like that kind of stuff. They'll go away and figure out if they like that or not. Pay, which is obviously now becoming more transparent, which is great because you can make more accurate matching, which we've been pushing for years. And then people are looking at like, oh, we need all the data. Okay, well, you can get all the data. Then it's like, ChatGPT can write the job spec for you. Fine. Well, that's just going to create more spam for people, and really good people don't want more spam. So then how do you create a kind of, I mean, I'm sort of talking about our roadmap essentially. Like, how do you create a safe place that's not noisy, very accurate, where you put your hand up? And it's kind of like what Hired was doing, right? Hired had this closed environment for really good engineers to go and get lots of offers. But the problem was then, like, it was probably too overwhelming, and a good engineer would get 50 interview requests. You can only really do 3, 4, 5 at a push, probably, and not lose your current job or your sanity. So it's just this, how do you filter and vet on multiple layers quickly to your point, when you're a VP and you're running a sales team, how do I get good AEs in C or customer success managers in C quick, who are not going to take 6 months to spin up and be successful? So it's that. Yeah, I agree. It's like the time gap. Jake, who you met.
And it's the same on the, sorry.
No,
I was going to say, it's as much, if not more, job seeker problem as it is for a hiring company problem, because the same applies if I'm a really good AE. Yes, I might have some people in my network that I'm going to go and speak to, but what do? I ping some, traditional agencies that work in my market. I select my LinkedIn status to actively looking and hope that someone pings me, and I apply for some jobs on LinkedIn and no one ever kind of gets back to me. So it still feels, like where everything else for people's, lives from consumers and how people buy stuff and interact, and everything's got a lot more efficient. That bit's still got a way to go. Sorry, you were saying?
I was going to say, so Jake, who you met, our head of marketing, I think it took me 4 months to secure that hire, but it was me doing it all. And it was like the sourcing took the most amount of time. Once we identified him as one or two others, it was like that bit was fine. We knew what we were going to do and we knew how we were going to decide. But yeah, it's just, even if you know what you want, that's the problem. It's a disconnect. You know what you want, you just can't see enough of it. And then that bit I think AI can solve it with humans, but you need the combination of all the good data, good design, good connectivity, good matching algorithms, and human judgment should sort of stay in the loop. But it's not a small task. No, interesting. Who is there anybody in the kind of, it can be a founder in the tech space or any other type of business, actually, we focus on technology, but founders, execs, people leaders, operational leaders, anybody you think that's particularly insightful around this whole future of work theme that we could or talk to, or who you would suggest we could try and get on the podcast?
I mean, there's a few good people kind of talking about this stuff. I think, interesting companies are people like Remote, some of the EOR type businesses who are kind of really seeing at scale that kind of remote hiring, how that's working, because that's another perspective that I think is really, really interesting. And it seems outside in that a lot of those businesses are still doing pretty well. But, how does that evolve over the next couple of years as well? I think that's a really interesting one as well, because you've got on one hand, the physical environment, which is kind of where we are. How do you create a workspace for the people to work in, build the culture, all that kind of stuff? And there's the other one, which is how do you go hire people anyway, which is in a very, very different direction when it comes to the future of work. Yeah. So I think there's some of the kind of leaders of those businesses, Deal, Remote Doc, those. Yeah, we know Deal. There's some interesting stuff.
Yeah, good shout. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to know whether they have sort of peaked or whether they will continue to grow kind of in a more normalizing world, if that will ever happen. I just think that will. Every single year there's something, right? It was 2019 was the last year of it, was very straightforward, and we had a very good year, and then since then every year is 2020 was obviously 2021 was mad for hiring, but too mad, and it was just absurd. And then it all started to slow down last year, and then we're in 2023 and there's a whole bunch of new challenges. Where can people listening, business leaders that we talk to, people listening to this, talent leaders, where can they reach out to you if they want to discuss this, Hubble, but just how they solve this problem? How should people connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a great one. And, that's a kind of a big part of what myself and the leadership team are doing here, is speaking to business leaders about, sharing ideas. This is what you could be doing. This is how you should be thinking about having the conversation with your team. And these are the different sorts of solutions that are out there and what other companies are doing. So yeah, on LinkedIn, always happy to have that type of discussion. Otherwise, HubbleHQ.com is our kind of main website, and people can kind of come and contact us that way.
Cool. Perfect. That was really cool. Really interesting. Yeah, I think the subject matter is, I'll try and like influence people about this and say, look, like, don't be so scared of like letting people be remote. But I think, you guys are very well positioned to offer like more solutions than people think are available to them. So I think that's very healthy. Thank you very much for that, Gordon. Great to have you on. Catch up soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Breakout. If you want to hear more, make sure to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast to be the first to get notified when future episodes are released. If you like the show or want to share feedback, please leave a review so we can keep improving and share the word with other leaders in the tech talent space. If you have suggestions for topics we should cover, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Gareth.